Salve de omnes, this is Magister Hodges, and for those of you who've been working through the declining a noun and present and imperfect verb practices after watching the presentations, I just wanted to kind of show you guys how to break down and do each of the practices that should mirror the graded quizzes. And so if you're struggling on these, then hopefully this video helps you out. I'll try and I'll show you the answers for the practice, and I'll also explain how I get to that step. What you're going to want for these is access to those noun charts that were available in the presentation, which you can get to back on the Google Class, on Google Classroom. And also access to your the verb review presentation, which you can get to on Google Classroom as well. One thing I would suggest, since the stream, if you're just in our Google Classroom, everything first off should be linked through It's Learning, but that can also be kind of messy. And I understand that Google Classroom can also be a little bit confusing. I wouldn't use it if it wasn't just the best way to collect this type of information using Google Forms and Docs and things like that. But I'm going to show you something that may help you organize things or get to things a little easier. So when you come in, by default, you're in the stream, which is just, a stream of assignments just kind of ordered by due date, which makes things a little messy when the due date is generally the same. So one way to remedy this is to go to classwork, which is up here at the top. Click that and ignore the grayed out things. These are other things that are in here that are not active. But you should see just noun review and verb review, and I'm going to try and break everything up that way, and that should be helpful for you guys. You're going to start at the bottom and work your way up on each one. So hopefully that helps out. You'll see the verb review fill up a little more next week when we talk more about perfect, pluperfect, future perfect verbs, and the rest of the third IO and fourth conjugation. So that should help. We're going to start with the declining a noun practice ungraded. Here's where all the materials are for the notes and the videos. So we're going to go here and you'll get to this. So what declension is sil was, sil why? Well, the one way to know for sure is to look at the second principal part and match that genitive ending with the declension's genitive ending. I know AE is the genitive ending of the first declension, so that makes that the answer. So since sil was, sil why is first declension, I'm going to just follow the steps of breaking the word down, and then following the steps as covered in the presentation. So the first step is to just copy the first two principal parts here, sil was, sil why, because those are always just going to be given to you. Then the next step is to find the stem, which is taking the second principal part, the genitive, and removing the genitive ending, which is AE. So I'm going to be left with sil. And now I'm just going to add all the other endings onto it. So the dative singular ending just happens to also be AE. Accusative singular is SILV. That's your stem. AM is the accusative singular ending. Make sure you're putting all your answers in lowercase. Google Forms is finicky with cases. I'm going to try and find a solution for that in the future, but until then, just by default, do everything lowercase unless told otherwise. Ablative singular, I'm going to put the stem, SILV, and that's where you'll have the long A. It's the only long mark I really care about right now. But since there's a way to put it in here, it's a little complicated, so for this and all future instances of the ablative singular in the first declension, you're going to put A asterisk, and that says long A to me. Then you're going to give the nominative plural, which is also sil y, SILV, arum for the genitive, silvarum and silvis, accusative and ablative plural, silvas, silvis. And I'm just getting those by following the declension chart. I, arum, is, as, is. Boom. And we're just going to do the same here, but with a different verb. We're going to look at the genitive ending, second principal part is just I. If you're looking at your chart and you're looking at the genitive endings, I is the second declension genitive singular. That tells us this is second declension. I'm going to copy the first two principal parts here. Barbers, barbari. Then I'm going to get my stem, which is just the second principal part without the genitive ending. So it's barbar. I'm going to just copy that to make this a little quicker. I'm going to add on the dative ending to this one, dative singular, barbaro, to the barbarian. I'm going to copy my stem in here, barbarum. Ablative singular is O, nominative plural is I, genitive plural is aurum, barbarorum, which is fun to say. Barbaris is dative plural, to the barbarians. Accusative, barbaros, and the ablative plural, barbaris. Senator, senatoris. You're going to look at that is ending right there. It's the third declension genitive ending. That tells us this is third declension. We copy the first two principal parts, senator, senatoris. And this is really where looking at figuring out the stem is important. For this one, it is senatoris without the genitive ending, which is just senator. That's our stem. And I'm going to start adding those third declension endings on. Senatori, senatorum. Next one down, senatore, senatoris for the ablative singular and nominative plural. Genitive and dative plural, senatorum for the ending. Dative plural, senatoribus. Okay. Accusative ending, or accusative plural, senatores, and ablative plural, once again, senatoribus. All right, I'm just going to submit, and I'm going to view my score, and it's going to be a 100 because those are all correct. I hope that helped, just seeing it happen. This is just forming the nouns, how they're formed. We're going to talk more about meaning later on when we do more reading practice in a couple of weeks as we ramp back up to reading Latin. So that's the declining a noun practice. Those are the steps. I was just following the steps as laid out in the presentation, and also the reasoning for how you figure out a noun's declension and then where to find the endings using the charts. If you have any other questions, please message me about that on It's Learning. Now let's look at the verb review. Here's the pre-quiz. We're going to look at the practice. You can find all the notes and other information you want here in this little presentation, or in this assignment on Google Classroom. We're going to do the review practice before the graded. So, again, first and last name, Magister Hodges. So here we're talking about first, second, third person subjects. So first person singular is always going to be I and we. If you're talking about second person, you're either talking about you or y'all. And if you're talking about third person singular or plural, you're talking about he, she, it, or they. When we say first, second, or third person, we're talking about who is doing the action. As talked about in the presentation, the ending of a Latin verb changes depending on who's doing it. And it can be first person, second person, third person, singular or plural. There are different endings for each. There are 6 endings that each verb can have. And it's important that you remember the general patterns that tell us who the subject is just by looking at the verb. So let's look at how we do that. I probably could have done this better with like a drop-down menu. I apologize if this was consuming. So we're looking for we were walking. We're looking for both tense and person. We see we were walking, so we know we're going to be dealing with the imperfect tense because we have were here. And we know we're going to be looking for the letters B-A toward the end. Ba, the imperfect sheep. And then, so we know we're looking at this bottom half here, and we know the subject is we, and we know that imperfect ending is bamus. And typically, if you see mus at the end of a verb, it is that means the subject is we. So ambula bamus, ambula walk, ba were mus we. We were walking. All right, so I'm going to do that a little quicker the next time. We got I walk. Well, that's happening now, so we know we're not looking for one with a BA in it, so we can just leave that out. We're looking present tense, which is these first 6. The subject is I, OST, must to sunt. That goes first, second, third person, singular, then plural. O, we know, is our first person, singular, present tense ending. They walk. Once again, present tense. We're looking up here. The subject is they. We know that ending is NT, ambulant. They walk. You were walking. Okay? Were walking. That tells us it is imperfect tense. Once again, we're looking at the BAs since it's imperfect. You is the subject. Generally, anything that ends with just an S, not tis, but just an S, is is second person singular. So, es, you, ba, were, ambula, walking. You are walking. To walk. Now this is one that will be new for my former students. We didn't talk too much about this explicitly, though we did see it. And anything that ends with re, typically are, ere, or ire, that's going to be what we call our infinitive form. That means there's no subject. It's just the verb kind of standing on its own. In English, we show that by saying to blank. In Latin, they show that with an are, ere, or ire, typically at the end. This is usually the second principal part of a verb. Ambulare, are to, ambula, walk, to walk. All right. So here we're just finishing the sentence with the proper verb, depending on the subject. You really do not have to know what any of these words mean in order to get them right outside of the first word in the sentence. In this case, it's ego. We know ego means I. I is first person singular. That ending is O. If I am doing the subject, the ending will be O in the present tense. So, ego multos amigos habeo. I have many friends. I wish, right, guys? Okay. Gladiatores, we know that's plural. That means the gladiators, and that is a plural subject. Third person plural, habent. That's NT for they or gladiators have. Vos multos amigos blank. Vos means y'all. That's second person plural. We're going to go habetis right there. Y'all have many friends. Once again, as explained in the presentation and video going over this, this first word is not always necessary. You may not see ego when you're reading Latin, but you will see the verb with an O at the very least. So this is just as a helpful tool to finish the sentence, but you may not always see these. The only times you definitely will see them is when the subject definitely has a name, like gladiatores. So third person singular and plural. Okay, puer. That just means boy. That's he, she, or it. That means third person singular. That ends with the T. Nos multos amigos. Remember, nos is your subject. That means we. And we, regardless of the tense, typically ends with mus. So, there you go. Now, conjugation ID. This means telling me whether a noun belongs to the first or second conjugation, which is a family of verbs that share similar patterns, kind of like declensions, but for verbs. Not as all-encompassingly important as knowing the declensions, but it will be important in the future, so we're just doing some brief practice now on the first two. The thing you're looking for here, it's really as simple as just like with nouns, looking at the second principal part and looking at the ending. Notice the difference here. We have natare and habere. Natare ends with an are, habere ends with an ere. And it really is as simple as if this thing ends with an are, the infinitive form, to swim, ends with an are, that means first. And this will get a little bit more complicated later, but for right now, if you're just choosing between first and second, if you see ere, it's definitely second because it's not are. Next week, when we learn about the third IO, and fourth conjugation, you're going to see other conjugations whose infinitive endings are ere, and so you'll also have to look at the ending of the first part. So in this case, second conjugation verbs always have their first principal part, habeo, ends with an eo, and the second principal part ends with an ere. And then lastly, we have sum, esse, fui, futurus. If you see that the second principal part, in this case, the word for to be, does not end with an ere, that most likely means it's irregular. Irregular means it doesn't follow the typical patterns of other verbs. For example, we know that sum means I am, es means you are, est means he is, sumus, we are, estis, y'all are, and sum, they are. Notice how it just changes a lot, not just in the ending, but in the beginning as well. That's characteristic of irregular verbs. There are more important ones as well that we're going to learn. I'm just using this as the most common example. And the only way to really know those is just to study them, and we'll talk about them a lot more later. So, submission, score, perfection. Hopefully this was helpful. If you guys have questions about something I did, or you felt I went too fast, or I could have explained something better, please reach out on It's Learning Messenger or email or whatever, and please let me know. And I'll be trying to set up some Google Meets this week and next week and going forward to get people the help they need, kind of, more face-to-face. Much love. Be well. Do your work. Walete.